I'm really delighted. I'm Kathy Ewing, the director of the South Asia Institute, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to today's talk by Sucheta Mahajan from JNU. And I'll just mention a few things about her, just to give you a little bit of background before we get started. And do you mind if I call you Sucheta?
Not at all.
Sucheta was formerly professor at the Center for Historical Studies at JNU. I think fairly recently retired.
February.
That was something I wanted to ask. Oh, February, okay.
Yeah.
And chairperson of the Archives of Contemporary History at JNU. Her fields of interest span the short and long history of the 20th century, its politics, political economy, and social change, and the oral history of independence and partition. She has been Gillespie Visiting Professor at the College of Worcester, Ohio, and at the Maison de Sciences de l'Homme in Paris. She has also been a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, at the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center, a wonderful place to be, and at Trinity College, Dublin. Sucheta's books include Independence and Partition, The Erosion of Colonial Power in India, published in the year 2000. India's Struggle for Independence, with Bipin Chandra and others in 1988. RSS, School Texts and the Murder of Mahatma Gandhi, the Hindu Communal Project in 2008, also co-authored. And Education and Social Change, MVF and Child Labor. I might be messing up my dates here, but also 2008, so you did a lot in 2008. And she's edited several books as well. Rites of Passage, A Civil Servant Remembers, H.M. Patel in 2005, and Composite Culture in a Multicultural Society. And most recently, Towards Freedom, 1947, Documents on India's Freedom Struggle, in 2013 and 2015. And I hope this is current, but I hear that you're presently writing a book on Gandhi's last years, leading up to his assassination, and the elaborate web of lies and myths that continue to surround the Mahatma and his legacy. Today's talk, which I won't bother to read the title, you can see it up there, will address, well, actually, for the record, I will. Revising History, Revisioning the Nation, Erasures, Distortions in History Writing in India. This talk will address the problem of how India's National Council for Educational Research and Training is rewriting history books as part of the nationalist project to depict India as the land of a homogeneous Hindu people with a glorious past and future, challenging, sort of gave my own spin on it, challenging India's democratic and secularist foundations and minimizing the Muslim presence in the medieval past and the present. So please join me in welcoming Sucheta Mahajan.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Is this the mic? No?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So I'm just going to say a couple of words here and then I move there. So
it would help if you could pick up the mic and put it on. No, when you get out.
Okay, fine, right. So thank you so much, Catherine, for this. And it is indeed an honor to be speaking here at Columbia University and at the South Asia Institute within that, which is a wonderful place for research on our part of the world. And some of our teachers have been here, like Sridhita, Kaviraj, and of course there's Partha Chatterjee, whom, of course I was really keen to be here last week on the 15th when there was a big thing for him, but that didn't quite happen. This talk is of course made possible by Professor Stephanie McCurry, So a big thank you to you for initiating the whole thing. And again, a bigger thank you to Kathy Ewing, to Bill Carrick and Annapurna, who have, really held my hand through the last 15 days of what I can call the biggest sort of red tape in the world, which is the forms you have to fill in for the Columbia finance, whatever, reimbursement or whatever thing. So, but it was, I'm not being critical of it, it's just very amusing for me coming from India, where we have so much red tape and we assume that you don't have any in this part of the world. So it was just a feeling that, look, it's all the same.
It's getting worse.
It's all the same everywhere. And this talk is part of two projects, really. It intersects two projects. One is this book on Gandhi, which I have been trying to finish up for a while, but doesn't get done because new material seems to come up all the time. And I shall talk a little about it during the talk. And but also it's part of a book which we had done, Mridula Aditya Mukherjee and I, which was on the RSS, the school texts, and the murder of the Mahatma, the Hindu communal project. Both I have the copy in a bag. So if you could just, sorry? Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's all right. I was just planning to circulate it. It's okay. It doesn't matter.
It might be for sale here.
Sorry?
Some of us were hoping it might be for sale here.
Oh, okay. I'll happily send you a complimentary copy. It costs very little. It's a small book. So that book, which was out in 2008, and in the context of major assault on education, and particularly on school textbooks, which I'll talk about, is now being brought out, a new edition, an updated edition for which now Penguin will be publishing. So I'm doing a little bit of, publicity for that, and we're hoping that it should come out before the elections, because the whole idea is that it might help if people know what the truth is. At my age, you continue to be partly cynical, but also a little optimistic always, foolishly optimistic, but we keep thinking that intellectuals and teachers like us, we can make a difference, right? So, so let me just go ahead.
Do you want to take this with you?
Yeah, I'll take this with me. And do you want the lights off or dimmed a bit?
I'm sorry?
Can we have the lights dimmed a bit? Right. Now, in April 2023, the National Council of Education, Research and Training, short form NCRT, announced a slew of deletions in the school history textbooks. But this was not the first time this was happening. And I'm going to go back a little in time. This is the privilege of the historian always. To 77-79, which was just after the emergency. And this was when what is known as the Janta period. And the government at that time called for the first time the withdrawal of these textbooks. Now you can see a picture here of a book, the textbook, a very old copy, Medieval India by Professor Romila Thapar. And these were books which were done by eminent historians, Romila Thapar, Bipin Chandra, Satish Chandra, Arjun Dev, and R.S. Sharma and others. And interestingly, these books were part of a clear political project, which was that the National Integration Council in India, this was sometime in the late 60s, felt that it was important to correct what they saw as the colonial and communal bias in the prevailing history books. So the idea was that they called upon this, people who were, liberal, secular, to come in and write these textbooks for school children, something which doesn't happen very often, Normally the worlds of high academia and, school textbooks are very far apart, unfortunately. So when the BJP came to power again as part of the NDA, the National Democratic Alliance, during 1999 to 2005, the ideological agenda of the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which, as you know, is the main force behind the BJP, though it denies association and calls itself a cultural organization. This ideological agenda of the RSS, a very old ideological agenda, was pursued fairly vigorously. And why am I underlining the vigorous part? Because this period was, the Prime Minister then was Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who till today is seen as a kind of, or he's projected by the BJP as a moderate, in politics and within the Hindu communal forces. But the moderation didn't help the fact that the education was something which couldn't be given up at all. And you have this cartoon here by one of our very famous cartoonists, Lakshman, from the newspaper Times of India. Some of you would recognize him and the cartoon. And you have the Minister for Education during this time, Murli Manohar Joshi, who was a professor of science, maybe physics, I think, at Banaras Hindu University. And he was one of the most ideologically oriented among the ministers, and could have been a minister for something, more important, like, say, in the pecking order, like finance or, whatever. But it just shows that somebody so important was made the Minister for Education, which otherwise is a portfolio normally, which is not prized by politicians, for obvious reasons. It doesn't get you much. But the ideological orientation of the BJP and the agenda behind transforming education in the mirror of the Hindu Rashtra project that there was, revising history, and by that it means revising history textbooks, was very high on this agenda. You would be surprised to read the next sentence where, coming from a responsible minister, where he termed the books which were written by Thapar, Chandra and company as intellectual terrorism unleashed by the left, and he compared it with cross-border terrorism. He said it was more dangerous than cross-border terrorism, and significantly this was right after the attack on Parliament. So, it meant something more than it would if you would just make a statement like this in the air. Now, RSS-minded historians, now thankfully there are not that many of them at that point of time, and there aren't very many good ones around even now, but Professor Makhan Lal was one of them who wrote the book on ancient India. And just to bring to your attention and a fact that he was somebody who was most well known for a book that he had done on Gandhi's assassination, what the documents say, and a history of the Jansangh, which is the party which was the precursor of the BJP. So his ideological orientation was very, very clear, and such a person being brought in to write this book for school children. In fact, it's a theme I'll take up a little later, but Gandhi's assassination was the most glaring omission in these NCRT books, which were otherwise also very shoddy. And the Indian History Congress, which is our most well-known professional organization of historians, had brought out a report by Professors Irfan Habib, Suvira Jaiswal and Aditya Mukherjee, which was called like a history of errors, where, there were just hundreds of factual and other errors. So it was not just bad ideology, but it was pretty bad history also. So, but Gandhi's assassination was something which was a very glaring omission in these books, which were literally produced overnight and unleashed with unholy hurry on unsuspecting and impressionable young minds by the NDA government in 2002. The the campaign, the one good thing about this period was that the civil society reaction to this was pretty strong, unlike today, where everybody is kind of gone under and doesn't want to speak up, nobody will sign, a petition or whatever. We're living in a state of fear. But at that time, there was a very strong campaign against this communalization of education. And there are just 2-3 points which I'm just drawing your attention to, so that maybe we can take a lesson or two out of this for what we might need to do today. And one of that was, they didn't get into the business of left and right. That this is a right-wing bias. We want to replace it with left-wing history. There was none of that at all. It was clearly understood that what was being opposed was a communal bias in education. And here I'm just comparing it, though I know the comparison is a little difficult, but with, say, racist prejudice or, say, anti-Semitic prejudice in other societies, that I can't think of many civilized societies where the propagation of racism or anti-Semitism would be allowed at the level of school children in textbooks. I think there would be a consensus normally that you can do what you want to out there in the political campaigns and, out there, but when it comes to young children, young minds, this is something we don't do. The third very, I think, positive point about this was that the campaign reached the public, and concerns of parents about their school-going children being exposed to this kind of history possibly got translated into some votes against the BJP at the hustings in 2004. But the last is something I'm making a kind of, one of those putting a foot out and making an assertion. It's more maybe belief rather than something that I can, of course, prove. I'm just talking about impressionistic sentiment from that time. Now, coming to more recent times, 2014, again, the BJP is back in power. And though they're part of the alliance still, but there is no longer, they're clearly in a majority on their own. And there's no longer that thing about, that they're restricted by other allies, as far as the ideological agenda is concerned. And the textbooks you see here, some of these, the pictures of these are textbooks which were introduced in 2006. The UPA, the United Progressive Alliance, which had the Congress and other secular parties in it, which was in office for a good 10 years, from 2005 to 2014, right? And so during that time, these new textbooks were brought out, which were, as I said, very interesting textbooks with more modern pedagogy, bringing in themes in history, etc. And one of the first things that was done when the government came to power from 2014 onwards was to push once again what we're calling the ideological agenda in education. As early as March 2018, when I say as early as, I mean we have the deletions announced today, that is in 2023, but the preparation all started in 2018, like 5 years ago. And a modified plan for NCERT books came up. And in the beginning, the announcement was that we need to trim the syllabus to, quote unquote, reduce the burden on students. Very populist kind of argument, which was designed to, be popular with students and teachers in the schools. And about 20% of the syllabus, they said, was going to be reduced. And of course, as you can imagine, the major cuts were in social science, because that's where the whole thing is. And a new national curriculum framework was announced, There had been one earlier one in 2000. And the Human Resources Minister, the term Education Minister and Human Resources Minister, I'm just using interchangeably because, one is the formal title and the other is what we know what they're doing. Jawaharlal, he announced, and this is a public announcement, that Indian history would henceforth correspond to, quote unquote, India's glorious past. What is interesting is, and this is a commentator did point this out, that this kind of view of India's glorious past is not limited to history textbooks alone. So when they're in the process of quote unquote revising the books, they are also doing this in the science books, where Vedic science, the so-called, glorious period when, there was Vedic science, Vedic mathematics, that also then is inserted into books in other subjects. Science, geography, that worldview comes in there also. So in a way, it's not only talking about history textbooks or limiting it to that. 2019, the BJP gets a majority on its own. Sorry, I had said this was done earlier. But they could now move ahead with their agenda without the coalition partners coming in the way. And the next two statements are basically showing what is the political support or the political preparedness for what we are seeing today. In 2021, the top leaders of the RSS and the BJP who run this center known as, quite innocuous title, Public Policy Research Center, they published a critique of the existing history textbooks. Quite surprising, that was not something associated with the kind of work they did. And also interesting is that the director of this center, Sumit Bhasin, he was the national convener of the e-training cell of the BJP. So the connection is very clear. A few months later, in November 2021, a similar report, that is a further critique of the history textbooks, comes from a Rajya Sabha committee. Rajya Sabha is our upper house, Lok Sabha is the lower house in Parliament. And here again, who is the head of this committee? Again, a leader of the BJP and RSS, very well known, Vinay Sahasrabuddhe. So the point is that the backing behind it is getting very clear. Now this year, in April 2023, you had the NCERT director appearing on television. Again, you wouldn't think that, deletions in books are going to be announced on television by the directors of the NCERT, but that kind of shows us how important the project is. He announced that there are just a few. In Hindi, he used the word faltu, useless sections here and there have been removed, giving the impression it wasn't something very much. And again, what he said was, we are rationalizing content, whatever that means, rationalizing. And of course, the old argument, reducing the burden on school-going children. And you found in the newspapers in the coming days, or in the TV channels, a young 12-year-old would be interviewed who'd say, oh, very good, history is in any case such, you have to learn dates and all that, and, so wonderful what's happening, So there was that kind of thing also happening. So this revised syllabus gets announced in April 2023, and the Indian Express, which is one of our major papers and one of the few papers which still takes a stand against the government, there are hardly any. The Telegraph is one which is also maybe bolder than the Indian Express. So they ran these, as you can see, front page articles, a series, a couple of days, and sort of banner headlines, and as you can see, they're striking out, it's very, it's very dramatic kind of headlines which came in a series of articles which were printed in the Express in early April 2023. I'll come to the what's been deleted in a minute. Now, there were deletions in various subjects, but as I said in a talk, I can't go into all these, but I've just put them here so that you can take a look, that this is the kind of range of things which were simply dropped. You know, you're not supposed to know about the emergency, you're not supposed to know about democracy, diversity, caste oppression, industrial revolution got dropped. Central Islamic lands, part of the anti-Muslim propaganda. People should know that, you know, Muhammad was born and what happened and the whole context, etc. Okay, but caste oppression is just something that I did want to make a little note on, which is that one could understand why from the RSS point of view, you know, the very regressive kind of social ideology that they espouse, why caste oppression was deleted. And this would go against the rosy picture of the ancient past, which is painted in the present type of Hindu communal history which is being written and projected. So it gets dropped not only from the textbooks that we're talking about, but also from the standardized syllabus of Indian history, which was announced by the University Grants Commission. And the University Grants Commission is something which funds universities all over the country, so it's a little binding. And unsurprisingly, and this is something which Irfan Habib has written about, what does it do? It's not just deleted from there, but it appears as a social practice in the bedeviled Muslim period, in the medieval period, to suggest that it's only when the outsiders come, the invaders, quote unquote, the Muslims, that then Hindu society has to, you know, do all these things to protect itself. So caste is one of those, caste system emerges as something in this period. So anything bad has to be put at the door of the quote unquote Muslim period. Now, I'm going to just take up two themes, right? To talk about the erasures and the deletions. And the first is the deletions relating to the assassination of Gandhiji. Now, there were 3 passages which were deleted. In the text, in the history book, there was a sentence which said that Gandhi was, this is at the time of partition in 1947, that he was convinced that any attempt to make India into a country only for the Hindus would destroy India. Obviously, something not very convenient today, right? So this was deleted. A second statement which was in the book, which said, Gandhi's steadfast pursuit of Hindu-Muslim unity provoked Hindu extremists. No RSS, there are some, you know, some extremists in the air, Hindu extremists so much that they made several attempts to assassinate Gandhiji. Again, you can understand why should people know that there were many attempts to assassinate Gandhiji, and because all of them, except for one, which was made by somebody who was, again, you know, angry with Gandhi for opposing untouchability, but the rest of them were all by people who were from the RSS Hindu Mahasabha background, the Hindu communal background. And the third item was the government of India cracked down on organizations that were spreading communal hatred. Organizations like the RSS, Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, were banned for some time. Again, it's drawing attention to a past, you know, which you don't want people to know about. So these were the 3 sentences which were dropped. Okay, now these are just a couple of slides which are about, you know, Gandhi's lying after he was assassinated. Women wore mourners. This is Calcutta, and mourners when the ashes are going. That's Hooghly Bridge there. This is in Delhi, you know, when he's being carried, as you can see. And these are people outside Birla House, what is today called Gandhi Smriti, where he lived and where he was shot. So, and this is just linked to that, and this is a copy of the first information report which was registered at the nearest police station to Birla House, which recorded the murder of Gandhi. And I'll tell you why I'm putting them here in a minute. So now the revised Class 12 history textbook, which was sent around now to the schools in after April, after the deletions. Now there's one sentence. At his daily prayer meeting on the evening of 30th January, Gandhiji was shot dead by a young man. Okay, the assassin who surrendered afterwards was Nathuram Godse. Merely a young man, a virtuous young man, right, who did not even escape. He did the right thing, he surrendered. Well, that's me, obviously this is, it's, so I'm saying even in, one is of course everything is taken away from him, any association, but even in what is there, it's sort of hinted that he did the right thing, because, doesn't matter that he shot someone, but he did the right thing. He surrendered afterwards. So just going back to 2002 for a minute, to tell you what was done then when, the textbooks which were written by Makhanlal and company. The book on contemporary India for class 10 written by Hari Om, it was also silent on Gandhi's assassination, not a line. And when there was widespread protest, all over the country and maybe even abroad that, how can this happen? The book was reprinted with a single sentence added. Gandhiji's efforts to bring peace and harmony in society came to a sudden and tragic end due to his assassination by Nathuram Godse on January 30, 1948 in Delhi, while Gandhiji was on his way to attend a prayer meeting. The bare bones. There was nothing on the enormity of the crime, its significance at a juncture when a newly independent secular state was struggling to survive. This is just 6 months after 15th August 1947, and also when the assassination was, to my mind, at par with the partition in terms of its impact on our polity. Now, in the 2023 book, there is silence on Godse. The name is there, if you recall, but his links with the RSS, later with the Hindu Mahasabha, with the leader Savarkar, whom, as you know, in India is eulogized and valorized as Veer Savarkar. His name is not used very often, Vinayak Damodar. And this is at one with the RSS shaking off any association with Nathuram Godse on the morrow after his assassination. On 1st February 1948, that's like what? 1 day after, right? 2 days after the murder. The Sangh Chalak, which means the head of the RSS in Bombay, he made a public statement where he said the alleged assassin of Mahatma Gandhi was never connected, never, do note the word never, connected in any way, and also note the word alleged, okay, with the RSS. And this was very strange because Nathuram was overpowered by people right there and he didn't escape. He was this very honorable man, remember Brutus? So in that kind of category. And then they went on to say, we have already condemned the dastardly and cowardly attack on Mahatma Gandhi's life, and we mourn this national calamity. During the research I was doing for my book on Gandhi's last years at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. last month, one of the finds in the rare book section of the law library was an original copy of the 6-volume proceedings of the Gandhi murder case and trial, with Nathuram V. Godse's signature on the cover page, which you can see right there. Also, Godse's links with the RSS are clear from many sources, not only from this record that I'm drawing your attention to, there's a pre-trial statement. That means the statement he gives to the police, where he very clearly talks about his links with the RSS. And this is something which two important books which have come out recently, Tushar Gandhi's book, not so recent, called Let's Kill Gandhi. He is Gandhiji's great grandson. And the most recent one is a book by Dhirendra Jha, which is called Gandhi's Assassin. I just used the cover page a couple of slides ago, where this statement to the police, which is there in the Bombay archives in India, has been reproduced to show that the later dissociation at the trial, where he says, I don't know Savarkar, I was the only one, that whole elaborate statement that he makes was an afterthought. Now, I can't go into the details because, it's not part of this, but there are many sources now where there's also the police reports on the RSS workers in Bombay province which are available. And if you look, and of course the archives portal, the National Archives of India now has a pretty good digital portal known as Abhilekh Patal. And the screenshot of this is the statement, the cross-examination of Godse during the course of the case and the trial. The second very important bit is his brother Gopal Godse, who was part of the conspiracy and who was released in 1964. He attested to his brother being in the RSS right till the end. And in fact, there was quite a exchange, controversial kind of exchange. Some of you might recall this was in 1994, very long ago, when the senior leader of the BJP, Lal Krishna Advani, who's is in some way very much more important even than the people who held office, he made this claim that Godse had been in the RSS in the early period, but then had left it, and then he was in the Mahasabha, and that he had nothing to do with the RSS by the time he was assassinating Gandhi. And Gopal Godse, his brother, came out very strongly, and there was a lot of stuff that he brought out, and including, which I've written about in the RSS book, also that when Godse went to the gallows, and the prayer that he recited that morning was a Marathi prayer, which was the prayer which was there in the RSS, rather than the Sanskrit prayer which had come in much later and the younger people knew. And there's a lot of evidence about his links right till the very end. In fact, more than Godse, it's more important politically, I think, to point out the role of Savarkar in the conspiracy, because Savarkar, as you all know, is the author of that text, very important text, Hindutva, where the whole philosophy and ideology of the Hindu communal forces is spelt out in very, very clear words. The whole idea that of Pitra Bhumi and Punya Bhumi, that the argument that only Hindus are the real citizens of the country because their ancestral lands and their sacred lands are in India, in the geographical entity called India, and the others, meaning Muslims, Christians, their holy lands are elsewhere. So that is made like the kind of crucible for citizenship, if you like, that you have to meet that sort of impossible criteria. So Savarkar is big. Savarkar's portrait was put up in Parliament despite much protest in 2004, and significantly right across the hall from where Gandhiji's portrait was. And Savarkar's role, though he denied it in the court, and this is a screenshot of his statement, it was recognized, and I'm not quoting from Jawaharlal Nehru because, if you quote from Nehru, then you think, oh, Nehru is bound to say this kind of a thing. But Sardar Patel, who's clearly one of the leaders whom the present Hindu communal right wing likes to appropriate and claims as one of them, he was very clear about this right after the assassination, that it's a wing of the Hindu Mahasabha led by Savarkar which was behind this. Now, evidence which could stand before a court of law, however, did not emerge during the case and during the trial. But it did appear before what's known as the Kapoor Commission in 1966. Now, this was a commission set up to go into what is the new evidence which has come up over the years on the issue of Gandhi's assassination. And they came to the conclusion that it was the group around Savarkar which was clearly there. But what's important for us is that one of the main evidence that they used was the testimony given by Savarkar's secretary, Damle, and his bodyguard, Kasar, who did not speak up, of course, while Savarkar was alive. But after his death, they testified in very strong terms to his links with the assassins and with the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha, of course. Now, in recent years, you must have seen this, many of you, that the next step after delinking Godse from the RSS is to assert his Desh Bhakti, meaning his love for the country, his patriotism is something which is now valorized. Many books eulogizing Godse have appeared over the years, and you can see again, it's just this is a short screenshot of the cover page of a book in a special collection of Hindu nationalist tracts which have been collected by the Library of Congress from various centers in New Delhi since about 2010. So there's a very, very fascinating collection. If any of you are interested, please, students particularly out here, this is something that I don't think has been used very much. And this is a book called Godse's Clarion Call. In Hindi it reads, Godse ki awaaz suno. Listen to Godse's voice. And not just books, but a member of parliament, Pragya Thakur, some of you might recall, about, it was 2019, I think, during the time of the last election. She came out saying that the greatest patriot, Godse is the greatest patriot of them all. And though the Prime Minister called her out and said, you shouldn't have said this, but she was not denied her ticket, and she was elected to the seat from the BJP at that time. And now you find a peculiar kind of inversion, if I can call it that, where Gandhi is being depicted in Hindu nationalist or Hindu communal tracts as the Asura, the demon, and Godse is being presented as the martyr, Shaheed. So the murder of Gandhi is presented as the slaying of a demon. In Hindi, Asur, demon, Vad, killing, right? And not martyrdom, Shahadat. Now this is a very interesting inversion that you're finding, and though it's, as I said, it's still, I mean, the BJP says these are fringe elements, etc., but it's no longer fringe. The politics behind the critique of these textbooks, I had mentioned some of it earlier, but the link with this public statements by the top leaders of the government, the Prime Minister and the Home Minister, were very clear. In the run-up to these announcements, you had the Home Minister Amit Shah declaring on 24th November 2022 that no one could stop India from rewriting its history with pride to remove past distortions. The Prime Minister on 26 December 2022 spoke of what he called concocted narratives and went on to talk about the mighty Mughal Sultanate blinded by religious fanaticism, while on the other hand, they were our gurus. You understand, our gurus. gleaming in the knowledge and living by the ancient principles of India. So, this kind of elision between Hindu India, the way it's done. Elsewhere, including to a joint session of the US Congress, I forget the exact date, but including there and at the Red Fort on an Independence Day speech, which is a very important speech, he spoke on many occasions of 1,000 years of foreign rule. Now, typically we would talk about 300 years or 250 years of foreign rule, meaning colonial rule. But when you say 1000 saal ki, slavery, then 1,000 years means the British and the medieval period, and which of course now nobody is talking about the medieval period as medieval, or Mughal or Sultanate. It's all Muslim. So the second theme, one was Gandhi's assassination, and the second is what's been done to the Mughal period. So major deletions relate to this period, as you could well expect. There's a negative portrayal of the medieval period. This negative portrayal goes against certain facts which have come up in writing recently. Ken Pomeranz's book, The Great Divergence, talks about how India at the beginning of the 18th century was producing 8 times the GDP of the United Kingdom, and so many more times compared to the rest of the world. India being the largest exporter of textiles to the world at that particular point of time. And of course, the last, something that Irfan Habib and others have written about for a very long time, that how this period was one of composite culture, advances in music, art, architecture, and literature. I don't have to, prove this in any way to this audience. Now, the negative depiction of the medieval period, and I think it's important to see where it goes back to understand what are we up against. It goes back to the British colonial ideologues. And the idea of 1,000 years of slavery, if you go back to your James Mill and the history of British India, Eliot and Dawson, this is talked about there. So almost as if it's being lifted from there. Professor Ramila Thapar is particularly very good on this, pointing out these kind of connections between the communal and the colonial writings. And two other areas of commonality, which I would really like you to think about later, I'm not going to talk about it, is that again, the identity of race and the identity of religion. This, which we are seeing a lot these days, Aryan civilization, Saraswati river, etc., in India, this again goes back to colonial writing. The theory of the Aryan race and the two-nation theory, totally pushed by, as I said, the British colonial writings on the subject. And later on, it's not accidental that they become the basis of the Hindu communal version of Indian history. I'm not going into the whole story of the Muslim League and the two-nation theory, because we're talking about Hindu communalism today, but it doesn't mean that I'm, not aware of that. Now, this of course is, just a take. I just came across it. I thought it was interesting. A contemporary take on two nations. There's we, the saffron, brigade on this side with their books and everything. The constitutional amendment bill is what he's carrying. And of course, the people of India. So that's the two nations, which the cartoonist Surit is talking about. Similar to many ultra-nationalist movements, Hindu communal forces use history to legitimize India becoming a Hindu state, what they call a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu nation. And this cartoon here, I think, just sums it up very well. You have Rewriting History of India, BJP. That's the title on the book, in case it's not. Is it clear? Can it be read?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And then there's, of course, New India 22 and the bulldozer is of course now the symbol of, you know, I don't even want to say what it is. So the propaganda machine works at the creation of a glorious ancient past, which belongs to Hindus alone. Remember, our past. And of course we know it's more myth than history, but that doesn't seem to bother anyone. Again, for any comment on this, we need to go no further than the Indian Prime Minister, who this was while inaugurating a hospital in Bombay, 2014, where there were a who's who of doctors, actors, business leaders out there. And what does he say? He says, we worship Lord Ganesha. There must have been some plastic surgeon at that time who got an elephant's body on the head of a human being and began the practice of plastic surgery. What I found most disappointing, I won't say disturbing, was that nobody called him out. Then, or when he went and made the similar statement to the Indian Science Congress, that's the professional body of the scientists in India, and he said the same thing there. So this of course begs the question, which is another aspect of it. So on the one hand, great achievements in the ancient past. How does this square with the propaganda that Hindus are threatened? Hindus must be afraid. I mean, surely in a country where Hindus constitute a majority of the population, and a very overwhelming majority of the population, Muslims are, I think, no more than 14% today. But there is this fear which is drummed up. And since Hindus sit pretty, in reality, the strategy is to remind them of past atrocities by Muslims. So Muslims, you have popular culture. You have the films which come about Alauddin Khilji and, Padmini. So the past, all the stories from the medieval past are picked up in order to portray and be constantly putting before the public this image of the Muslim as rapist, the Muslim as the person who's assaulting the Hindu woman, so. And this, of course, you may have heard the term, very odd term, love jihad, which has now become very popular. So when Hindu-Muslim marriages, where there's a Hindu girl getting married to a Muslim boy or a man and getting converted, these are condemned and as love jihad. Because, and again, as you know, in this country and all over the world, Islamophobia, there is a general kind of spirit of Islamophobia which we have seen all over the world since 9/11, and it's, it's there. And it's very easy to tap into that kind of subterranean sort of, psychosis that there is. And so love jihad, and it can become, something very big, and the couples will be very often, they could be arrested, they could be, beaten up, assaulted, or worse. So very clearly this is the kind of play on sexual anxiety which is very common to strategies of communal regimes and communal states. I can't go into this aspect, but I mean, just flashback to Hitler and fascism for a moment, and then, some of this might make a little sense. What is the takeaway then? As students and teachers of history, and I mean all of us here, firstly, a recognition that colonial writing is to a large extent the basis for the Hindu communal rewriting of history. And of course, this is something that Professor Tanika Sarkar has pointed out, that even post-colonial scholarship and post-modernist traditions of writing which challenge one, the idea of a truth and offer the perspective of multiple truths, or post-colonialism, which with its emphasis on the cultural domain and the kind of moving away from the political material, sort of area, that this can provide and has been used by the Hindu communal forces to give validation to their kind of cultural nationalism. Now again, this does not mean that I'm making any, I'm just saying, I'm not trying to paint postmodernism or post-colonialism, in some general kind of way. That's why I'm saying very specifically, this is a point which Tonika Sharkar has made, and in her writing on the Hindu right. Well, in the end, I would say that, and I know this is controversial, and I hope we have some discussion on it, but I even think that the privileging of memory over history in recent historical writing or recent academic writing, I'm thinking of Agha Shahid Ali, and famous poet, and saying, your history comes in the way of my memory. That was his very famous kind of statement, self-statement. This can open up a space for Hindu communal history founded on myths, memories, perceived wrongs, and religious beliefs. This idea of wounds, of historical wrongs, of wounds, historical wounds which have to be corrected. There is so much around this now which is valid in its own way, but it does provide a kind of space which can get used and is getting used, is what I'm trying to say. What's the worrying part about what we are talking about today is that what we're talking about is not something happening only in the classroom or only with textbooks. It is an extensive public project. It spreads its tentacles through every available public platform, including social media, the press, parliament, cultural organizations, cinema, religious festivals, as you know. I mean, when we grew up, we didn't know there were so many religious festivals as they seems to be now around, which are being officially celebrated. And of course, the schools and universities. And while we continue to speak to the already converted, I'm sorry to sound a bit cynical, which is, I'm kind of referring to this room right now, the image of our present remains grim, as we can see from the following picture, which I just end with. It's Savarkar there, our Home Minister showering petals, and you can see behind that Bharat Mata with the swastika, the Trishul, the iconography, and the whole thing is, I don't have a word for it, but thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see the light. I think I will start with just one comment and then open up the floor. I found this very clear and very convincing narrative of the process that censorship that you've been describing. It's sort of related to one of the last points you made, suggesting that some of the post-colonial scholarship and its emphasis on, there's things like emphasis on memory, emphasis on culture and such, kind of opens a space for this history. And yet, we don't want to, certainly don't want to turn away from looking at those things. But I'm wondering too, and I have to admit, I come at it from, I'm basically an anthropologist, but also thinking psychodynamically.
Okay.
And you know, one of the part of the process you described about the treatment of Muslims as the invaders and this turning of this experience of invasion, which is you know, it riles up affect. And yet they're drawing inspiration from colonial writers, you know, and the presumably the ways that these colonial writers were representing Muslims. But it strikes me that there's a little bit of, I mean, I think that makes sense, but it's almost as if I see one other element in it, I guess I would say, which is, and it is probably implicit in what you're saying, that the experience, the memories of the experience of colonialism under the British, which are of course still vivid, I mean, they're still experienced in the living memory of some, and of course well remembered, are then projected back, almost displaced onto the Muslims. In other words, that later colonial experience is used to remember Muslims. And then, of course, then the Muslims, it becomes present-day Muslims that are become the bearers of this affective experience.
No, I think it's a very interesting point that you're making. The last part first, what you talked about, this kind of transference of the memory of colonial oppression and the memory of the colonial oppressor, right? Onto an earlier past, you know, onto the Muslim period and the Muslim rulers, etc. It's not surprising at all that this should be the case. And I think here there are two elements, two very different elements here. One is, it happens because you might remember Anand Mat by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's very famous iconic novel, and that he talks about the revolt of the sannyasis, which is a pre-colonial revolt, right? Muslims, Hindus, the sannyasis are the, you know, the, what would you say?
Monks or saints.
Sorry?
Like monks.
Monks, saints, whatever. So there very clearly the argument is that Bankim was doing it because at that moment in time he could not write directly about colonial rule. So it was a device. It was very clearly a device where he was kind of, you know, transposing, as it were, whatever he wanted to say about Britishers, that was being fixed onto the Muslim rulers. And that we see a fair degree of, and not surprisingly, if we accept this kind of explanation that, you know, because this is early nationalism in terms of organized thing, you know, we're talking about the late 19th century, and then, you know, only later on then people are talking directly. So the Muslim ruler and what's happening in that period becomes a kind of way, a device, you know, you use to, you know, and those who you're writing for understand. That's the, you know, they would understand that this is about the colonialism, it's not there. So that sort of thing we see. But there's another element in this which is very, very different when we look at the Hindu right wing and what happens there. Because there is a certain, what you're saying about, again, the transposition comes in. Because there's no leader of the RSS or Hindu Mahasabha worth worth their salt or worth any name really, who took part in the freedom struggle. Now that's something which they know, and they keep trying to produce. Vajpayee went for 2 days in some thing in Gwalior, or Hedgewar, they find one little thing somewhere which they chase and bring out. But the thing is that so they have to, in a way, I think, invent or go back to the medieval period to be talking about oppression, because they were not just that they were not in the freedom struggle, they were on the other side very clearly. We talked mostly about Jinnah and the Muslim League, about supporting or being loyalists to the British, but it was Savarkar who first talked about the two-nation theory 3 years before Jinnah and before the Muslim League took it up at Lahore in 1940, the Pakistan resolution. So what I'm trying to suggest is that there's a kind of inevitability about their villains being Muslim and etc. being there in that way, because being anti-colonial isn't anywhere part of their makeup and hasn't ever been. I mean, for the last more than 100 years now. So actually what you're saying is very, very interesting, because maybe you meant something else altogether. It's possible, but you see, we're also all postmodernist after a point. We're reading stuff into things, but so I think in two very different ways this kind of transposing is happening. But I hope I was not misunderstood about the part about the critique of post-colonial and postmodern, because very clearly this has been something which has brought so many areas into the field of history that we practice. So when I think Tonika Sarkar talks about that there's a move away from the political material, as she calls it, to the cultural domain, I think it's perhaps, I'm not holding any brief for her, but I think that what she's just stating is that there is let me put it differently. When I went to university, there was no question of doing anything other than what we call socio-economic history, because somebody studied the something of capital in this state, somebody talked about labor. It's not because we were Marxist, but because that was E.P. Thompson was the flavor of that decade. So everybody did class struggle, whether you were liberal or left or whatever. It was, there's a kind of how it goes. And I think in that same way, subaltern, post-colonial, postmodern, I think literary critical theory, it has certainly fertilized the whole field of history as we know it. I mean, and if I'm talking about a critique of memory, Stephanie and I'm so happy that Eileen, both of you are here, because we have been part of a project together where we've been talking about oral histories and the memory of partition. In fact, that's a lot of the work I've been doing for the last 5 years has been on the connected histories of memory, remembering and forgetting in the context of partition and Ireland. So it would be a self-critique
I didn't take it as I didn't mean it as a
no, I know you did.
critique.
I was just explaining. Yeah.
But it is interesting to think
please.
about the effects.
Yeah. No, I'm not sorry.
But
No.
good.
Yeah.
So
Hi, my name is Jack Coleman. I was in Banaras in February, I guess it was, of this year, and visited for the first time the museum that has been established in the corridor that the BJP has built in Banaras. And it was very striking to see that the Palace of Rajamansingh has been chosen as the location for that, and that the Katwas, and specifically Mansingh, seems to be being projected there as a sort of unifying figure for the Hindu majority, let us say, active at that point in time. So that, of course, runs against the very close association between Mansingh himself and the whole state.
Of course.
I just wonder if you could comment on the larger picture of what's happening around the Katwahas and their revaluation.
Around the?
Around the Katwahas and their
Yeah.
revaluation in modern India. Another sort of aspect to this different kind of question has to do with NCERT textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, it seemed quite important, the difference between the Hindi language versions and those that were in English. I haven't studied what's happening today, but I took away from your talk that perhaps the line of division between what could be said in Hindi and what could be said in English is no longer quite the same kind of divide.
That's very interesting. Yes, you're right about the last point, that there was a certain more sanitized version which would be there in the English writing. Yes, and you certainly find that not so much in the books that we're talking about today, but in the books which are taught in the RSS schools. You know, the Vidya Bharati schools, the Shishu Mandirs, the most dangerous of all, in some ways, what's happening in the tribal areas in India, where the Ekal Vidyalayas, and these are schools which are just like, one person schools kind of thing. And I was doing some research on this, and I found that they were largely funded by individual contributions coming from non-resident Indians, and largely from the United States and associations in other parts of the world. But that's taking away from your point about the Mansingh. I don't know this very well in any detail, but but this seems part and parcel of what they seem to be doing in other parts of the country, and in the way that local heroes are picked up, and attributes are introduced into them, into those or attributes are added to their persona, if you can call it that.
But the interesting thing, if you're interrupting, the interesting thing about Mansingh in that
Yeah.
regard is that he was active in many parts of
Yes.
North India, including Bengal, as far as that, and
Yeah.
all the way up into the northwest. So it's correct that he was involved in many places, but what's not correct is that his own activity was apart from what was happening in the service of the whole state.
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right in this. And all I could say about Mansingh and the way what they've done with the other Rajput, heroes of that period. Two kinds of things, I think. This, I think, would be an example of a kind of appropriation, the Raja Mansingh case, because he is very much what one might call a quote-unquote secular hero, right? Because, I mean, I'm just, what I mean, or a composite part of a composite culture, being part of, as you said, the broader sense, being part of the Mughal state and nobility, etc., the alliances, etc. I mean, he's a name which every child knows. Raja Mansingh is, when you say alliances with the Rajputs, you have Raja Mansingh. So it's a very interesting question then why he would be picked up rather than, I mean, I can understand why Maharana Pratap would be picked up, because that's an obvious thing, because, he is the person defeated, and, but, it's a bit like if, maybe I'm making some very kind of wild parallels here, but forgive me if it doesn't work. It's like the BJP and RSS appropriating Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel.
So I think one big reason is Mansingh's granddaughter,
Yeah.
a member of parliament from BJP, who
Mhm.
happens to be the Queen of Jaipur now, the undermined. So, in order to change the narrative, because
Wait,
if,
wait, wait, wait. More generations there, but yes.
I mean, that's the only link that connects on the dot is,
That's an interesting point.
yeah,
That's a very direct kind of
I hope it's
link.
being recorded. It's very clear, because in order to be a member of parliament of BJP right now, you have to be associated with RSS. And the origin of RSS, other than Maharashtra, the biggest strong foothold is Uttar Pradesh. And if you want to change your image from being an ally to Mughals, this is the best way to, make a different narrative. So,
Did you want to say something?
I had a question. I'm just on the point as well. I think it's also interesting. Oh, sorry.
I don't know.
You need to speak a little
Okay.
louder.
No, just similarly to that, I thought it was interesting also how like RSS and BJP appropriate like Bhagat Singh and Bhagat Singh's image as a right wing extremist, whatever they call it, when he was very clearly a left wing Marxist. Historian. But no, I just wanted to. I really enjoyed the talk. Thank you. And I just wanted to ask. I kind of forgot the question now because I was thinking about this. But just specifically about your, because you brought up Bankim Chandra and Andaman, it's very interesting because the postmodernist theory and post-structural theory that we're talking about, especially Professor Partha Chatterjee's theory, he talked about how, and I think, I don't remember which book, but I think in Nation and Experiments, he talks about how, even in Bankim Chandra's writing, this sort of binary division between a Hindu past and a glorified Hindu past and a oppressive Muslim past also comes up. So would you say there is any link between, is there, rather than seeing what's happening right now as a break from a more progressive past, would you say that this is actually quite more of a continual history
From when?
from late 19th century when late 19th century nationalism, even during Congress, nations, and to a more recent, is it rather a history of some sort of continuous history rather than a more recent break in the tradition of history writing?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's
I don't think I'm, either I haven't got the question or I don't think the way you're framing it, that one can possibly agree to it. When you say that it's part of what's happening today is part of a continuous history. I see where you're coming from because you're picking up the example of Bankim, say late 19th century, and saying he was doing that then, they're doing it now, maybe somebody else was doing it in between, right? That's where you said Congress or whoever, ...
I mean, not that
So it's always been happening kind of thing.
I mean, not that directly, I just meant
You know, the thing is that the motives that there are, the myths that we have, they're all, there is only a certain set, or subset that we work with in society. Just to give you an example from Gandhi. Gandhiji used to use the word Ram Raj. Ram Raj meaning the rule of Rama, to describe what India would be like after independence, right? Now, some people then picked it up and said, including latter-day historians, but even, the Muslim League then said, see, this is Hindu Raj. See, even Gandhi is talking about Ram Raj. Beware, it's going to be Hindu Raj. Now, Gandhi is not Nehru, right? Gandhiji spoke the language, and I'm so happy you spoke, you brought up the question of Hindi and English, and, it was, so the language he spoke was the language of the people. Now, I don't see Gandhi going to a meeting in a village in Champaran and saying, we are going to build a utopia. It doesn't make any sense. But Ram Raj for him was utopia. That's all it meant. And interestingly, the ordinary people whom he spoke to knew that, including the Muslims. We have interviewed many people about this kind of, what did you mean? What did you understand when Gandhi said this? And it's like to give another example, the chopais from the Rama, there is the the Ramayana of Tulsidas, which is the more popular Ramayana in a more accessible language in Braj, not the Valmiki's Ramayana. Not Braj?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. In the chopais from that, the verses would be sung by the peasant leaders or activists in UP in 1921. Gyanendra Pandey has written about this in his books, where this Baba Ramchandra, when he would go around, he would be singing this, because if you go and say imperialism, communalism, colonialism, it's not going to make, you have to speak a language which the people speak and they understand. So there is, I think in that sense, maybe I went off a different track, but what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't mean it's a continuous history. There is that, I think, a certain set of, call it symbols, call it myths, call it motives, call it techniques, whatever, strategies of this thing, which we all work with, and then, yes, of course, the reason we're talking about this is because the right wing is very smart. They're smarter than us any day. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about this here. We would have, and so they are drawing on that whole, as I said, a kind of thing. So if they pick up Mansingh in Banaras, that shows how smart they are to be. And when they try to, it's that cherry picking. They pick off from the freedom struggle. They've not had anything to do from it. But they just pick up one of our best leaders, Vallabhbhai Patel. And because Vallabhbhai Patel had certain frailties at a particular point of time, etc., that's what I look at it. He becomes their big leader, They are able to put Gandhi on that Swachh Bharat thing, poor Gandhi who they murdered, and then they take his spectacles and they put it on the, as the logo for their, Clean India campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So, I hope that makes some sense.
I think first we have Stephanie and then.
Well, Sucheta, as always, it's amazing to listen to you and how clear you are about these national processes that so many countries are going through right now, so many polities. And there's one specific thing that you said that, well, two things. One, when you were talking, you said quite early on in your talk, you weren't sure how common it is for communalist narratives to be so widely disseminated in textbooks through the education system, et cetera, and the equivalent of anti-Semitism or racism. So that made me think, of course, about the fact that that's what I work on, about the United States in the second half of the 19th century. But the reason I'm raising it is because, as always, you're making me think more clearly about the version that you get in another place. Right? So in this case, the United States.
Yeah.
And you said that you don't like the privileging of memory over history. It makes you suspicious because of its easy deployment, I'm guessing. Because of its easy deployment in these political narratives that are very partisan, damaging. And the privileging of memory over history, so that can open space for these communalist, or in our case, racist narratives. And I share the same anxiety, let's just say. I wrote an article for The Atlantic when Trump was in office that said basically, everybody was talking about the memory of the Confederacy, and I wrote an article that basically said you don't know what the Confederacy really was.
About,
In other words, the memory has overtaken any real knowledge of how that was as an historical event. But the thing that worries me, and I just wanted your thoughts about this, is that I share your view of the privileging of memory because of its malleable quantity. It's been, it's now. But at least in the U.S. case, the memory that was so dangerous about, say, for example, the causes of the Civil War, what slavery was, what Reconstruction was like, how it was a crime against white people no need to go into it. But that came first. And then the scholarly histories came that said exactly the same thing. Woodrow Wilson, was himself a key proponent of this kind of history, and he wrote constitutional histories of the United States that gave the dressed up version of exactly that narrative. And then it was overturned in the scholarship and receded, alive and popular, sort of pro-segregationist states. And I mean, the United States could be different because of the state control of education. I don't know how much of the extent to which education is national in India. Part of the problem in the United States is that it's devolved to the states. But I guess I'm just wondering about your thoughts about that, about the relationship between memory and history, that they're kind of in a cycle that goes on.
Yeah.
And we're suspicious of memory now because it's doing a lot of damage. But it won't be long before they turn out their new version of Jim Crow histories of the United States. We're going to get them. I mean, somebody's going to write these new histories for the state of Florida.
Yeah.
And then they're going, or some historians, I mean, I don't know, that remains to be seen, but I don't think I'd like to think I share your prejudice, but I'm just nervous about the relationship between memory and history. I don't actually think they're as separate as we would like to think they are.
Yeah. I think I need to, thank you so much, Stephanie, for that, but I think I need to basically rephrase that bit about the privileging of memory over history, opening this up. As I said, when Catherine also earlier in the discussion today raised it, I did clarify that my own work has been a lot in recent years on memory. And I'm, so the relationship between, say, even the project that we're doing something on the archives of sexual violence. Those archives are basically about recorded memories, right? Okay, so that kind of, it's a very complex relationship, as you very rightly pointed out. It's not, yes, there are cycles as you see them, and what you are describing, I could almost ditto that for the way that in our own writing, if you put milestones as far as the writing of history of India in the last 100 years, one would see that sort of thing, that where the testimonies of the peasants of indigo peasants of Champaran, whom Gandhi goes to, it's his first place that he sort of goes to in India, those testimonies are become the basis for his practice, for his struggle, and that becomes then, and then we have the struggle, and then we have the memories of that struggle. And one of the we started off on doing oral histories in India, not with the partition, but with the histories of the freedom struggle, and and that was like, it was huge for us because it meant, as you said, rethinking and questioning our own practice. We went out as these secular, from JNU, this very progressive kind of place, and where did we go first? We went to Kerala, which was a bastion for workers, and left bastion. And what were we getting there? We were getting the whole thing made us give up Gramsci for Gandhi, if I can put it so, so kind of, look, I'm just trying to sum it up in a very wild kind of way. But you're absolutely right, the relationship is one which, you call it a cycle, and maybe that's an interesting way of looking at it. But I'm very far from saying that memory is not important at all, but and you're right to draw attention to this. But just one more thing about the comparison with the writing here. I was, in fact, my husband Bodh, who's here, was urging me to bring into this a little bit about American textbooks, and I said it's not my area, I can't, But just living here the last 2-3 months and reading the newspapers, what's happening in Florida, the whole thing about Governor DeSantis and, what we are getting from there, going into the African American History Museum in DC, it's like, it's a sense all the time of reading my narrative through another prism, which is, and it's kind of, sometimes you really wonder, is it just over interpretation that we're reading so much into each other's histories, and then possibly not, because some of it is, it's just happening. There's a real sense of, am I looking in the right mirror, or am I just seeing things, It's really,
it's hard not to, hard to see, knowing what's happening in the two places, it's hard not to see the mirror.
Yeah, but a little more than that, I think, it's not only that it's because you're seeing them in both places, but I think there are the concerns are very similar. And I think that we could do very well with connected histories of
We always need a project.
Yeah. I'm looking to get out of some,
But we're running low on time, so I think I'll take both of your,
Very quick.
I'll
I
take
do
both
want
of
to
your
say-
questions.
I do want to say your last, where you outlined some criticisms of post-colonial, postmodern. I thought they were extremely well, and I thought I really may not be the right audience to express agreement with that, but I was very appreciative that you were doing it. And
Thank you.
I found the talk extremely useful, and thank you very much. I have 3 very specific things dealing with Godse.
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh no, I've nothing to do with any of this. I work at the medical sector, I do statistics.
But he comes
great.
off.
So
I see.
completely unrelated to it.
Okay, lovely.
And so you met, 2 things went by me quickly in the slides. One was how Godse was described in some of the rewrites in the textbooks and so on. So like the phrases like virtuous young man, is that actually found?
No.
in the textbook?
I said very clearly that was my little take on
Okay,
it.
fine. Okay. So, and the second thing was you mentioned the 6-volume thing at the Library of Congress, which had his signature. What is the significance of that signature?
They seem to suggest the way that the item is described in the catalog. You can look it up online. Just put loc.com or whatever. But the way they describe that item, it's a 6-volume proceedings of the Gandhi murder case. That's the first part in the Red Fort, and then the trial, which is after the appeal. So it's had all the testimonies, the statements, etc. So the significance of they just say it's like a signed copy. They say, his name is on it. He signed on it. I can't corroborate it, but I'm sure if it's in the Library of Congress, they must have, checked it out.
For
But
my main question now.
Yes.
NCERT, which is what you started with.
Yeah.
Because of my being away forever from India.
Yeah.
And so my impression is that state level schools, like I did SSLC in Tamil Nadu. So our curriculum was set by the state government. And does NCERT control only the CBSE schools? And not other schools?
The question is, it's a very valid question. In fact, Stephanie also, I think at some point alluded to national curriculum and what's happening in the states. And there's no doubt about it that education is majorly a state subject.
Nominally, right?
Yeah, it should be, it's to be looked into by the states.
Right.
So you're right about that. Now what's happened is, what's happened and unraveled is different from what's there in the statute book in terms of concurrent subject, state subject, etc. That the NCERT books, being very good books to begin with, I'm talking about the 70s and 80s, etc., 90s, written by these very good historians, they were adopted by a whole lot of state boards, so much so that they became like, you know, they were popular, or they were introduced, let's say, all over the country at that time. That's what happened by a kind of default, right? Not that it was prescribed to be so. And also, it's also related to the board. You're rightly saying the Central Board of Secondary Education. Now that board has increasingly, when we went to school and college, there was the board which was very popular was the ICSC, you know, etc. And they were linked with Cambridge, and part of the whole, you know, decolonizing or whatever you want to call it has been that the Central Board of Secondary Education is now the board which the best schools in the country are connect with, including the private schools. Yeah, so.
But for what it is worth, I'm sorry, you know, I talked to my niece just 2 days ago. She has a son in 6th standard in a CBSE school in Chennai, and she tells me that he has to learn about Godse in his textbook 6th standard. And she says, as a result, quite a few, especially Muslim families, are leaving the schools like hers and going to IB-based schools, because the IB is still
Yes.
an international curriculum.
Yeah.
But people are more comfortable with that. So
Yeah, this is the whole
Okay,
thing.
so
yeah.
I think we're only going to have time for just to take your questions. First you, and then you, and then you.
I won't answer. I'll answer in the corridor.
Yeah, something like that. So just
Thank you very
quickly.
much, fascinating.
Thank
I really
you.
enjoyed the talk. But as you know, by the way, my name is Akbar Noman. I teach here at Sept, National Public Affairs.
I see.
And I'm one of those rare people who went to school in both India and Pakistan. Not
see.
many people these days that claim that.
Wow.
But anyway, and I've traveled a lot in the two countries. Okay, I consider myself a citizen of both in many ways. But as you know, there's been an equivalent project in Pakistan of rewriting history, and it's just mirrors in some ways.
Yes.
Kind of, project. And there have been some really interesting critiques. I don't know if you're familiar with those of Pakistani historiography by people like Pervez Hudboy.
Yes, Pervez Hudboy is somebody we follow a lot, and I listen to his podcasts, and I'm a great fan
But are you familiar with his latest work? This,
on the Pakistan movement.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
And so, and one of the arguments of people like him and others in Pakistan, which I think that's my father and mother, is that this kind of rewriting of history and so on is part of a project which is sort of anti-science, anti-enlightenment, anti-reason, and that leads society to certain dead ends, right? And then pass of the society in Pakistan. I'm not familiar with similar writings in India, right, which relate this kind of distortion of history to a kind of societal mental distortion, if you will.
Yeah. One person who has, thank you so much for that. And
Can we just take our
yeah, sure.
last question?
Of course.
Hi, I'm Sajna.
Yeah.
I'm a student in the sociology department.
Okay.
Can you hear me clearly?
Very much.
Okay. My question was related to something that you started the talk with about how in 2002 there was a strong civil society response. So now as you're updating your book in preparation for the upcoming elections, I'm wondering how you have been documenting ongoing negotiations and resistances to this rewriting of history. So for example, my mother was a teacher of art in a CBSE school, and she was selected by the NCRT to be a part of some of these discussions on rationalizing the curriculum.
Yes.
And so even for the art history curriculum, there was a lot of discussion and push and pull on like removing artworks like Mughal miniatures, reducing the number that students had to study, reducing Gandhara style Buddhas and like focusing on Mathura style Buddhas, and that was all in the name of like reducing the burden of like memorization and like rote learning for students. And then the second part of my question, so that's like are you looking at negotiations that are taking place within these rationalization committees? I'm sure there must be some minutes and some things like that, because from what my own mother's like reflections on that and her subsequent removing herself from these committees was that it was completely overtaken, like who was selected. She was surprised that she had been selected and then was completely overtaken by the political project of like conducting these negotiations. So I'm sure there are like records of those minutes. And the second is resistances that are also led by, again, historian Ramla Thapar, ex-director of the NCRT, Krishna Kumar.
Yes.
And projects like History for Peace,
yes.
Bicycle books,
yeah.
and kind of like trainings that they're doing for like historians and history teachers, especially for middle and high schools. Like I've attended some of those discussions and you really feel hopeful. And I know you're talking about the cynicism that's really prevalent, but one of the spaces that I really felt hopeful in the recent past was like attending those trainings and workshops for teachers and even just receiving, the weekly or monthly newsletters they send out, and it just makes me hopeful that someone is trying to do that and like, do like the work of resistance against the rewriting of history. So that was my
Thank you so much. You really brought a sort of right note to the discussion, by reminding us that, and it's bound to come from a younger person, which is just how it should be. But the example you gave of your mother, the minutes are not available easily, but I know that other people who have been part of these committees have spoken out in the press and other places saying that, similar experience, that you were brought in, but then when you didn't go along with the tide, you were kind of sidelined and stuff. But you're absolutely right, History of Peace. I mean, I get the newsletter, I always pass it on to us, the research group that I have and many groups. So yes, there is, we can't live without hope, of course. But I would like to just take half a minute for Akbar's, if I may call you that, question, or rather, talking about Pakistan. I presume you're talking about Lahore. You're being you're going to school in.
No, I went in Karachi more.
Oh, in Karachi.
Briefly in Lahore as well.
Okay, fine. No.
Calcutta, Hyderabad, Dhaka is in India, and Karachi.
Okay. All right. Okay, fine. Because my parents were in Lahore just before 47 and sort of studying and then teaching, and then they came across. So I don't know, somehow there's always this connection, which is wonderful. But yes, Parvez Hoodboy, you're absolutely right. He's one of the very strong voices. And one thing which, in fact, Bodh and I have been, in fact, Bodh follows him more than I do, is that what's very interesting about him is that he's now speaking, a lot of his, what's coming on YouTube and stuff, he's talking now in Urdu to small groups. And that's getting now, like, it has so many thousands of hits and views, etc. So I think that's something that we're learning from him, that you need to get out of this English speaking world if you have to be able to connect. Hindi, English, Hindi, Punjabi, whatever is your language, Bengali, whatever it might be. So that's thank you for that. That's a very important thing when you're reminding me of Parvez. Your question about are there people in India who are seeing this history textbooks, this whole critique and this project as from a wider perspective. And one person who has recently written a lot about it is Ganesh Devi. Ganesh Devi, who's this public intellectual, his field is basically culture studies and literature, but this thing, and there's Dhruv Raina. Dhruv Raina is again a science kind of, I'll send it to you, I'll write it out and I can give it to you. So if I would love to have your email, so I have to correspond with this.
Many mutual friends from JNU.
Okay, I'm sure. All right,
Okay.
But yes, it is.
Well, thank you so
thank
much.
you. Thank you so much.
Wonderful talk.
For everybody.